Hello, welcome. As Professor Carl Wilcoxon pointed out, we have lots of people in the Blount Auditorium today. Whether you're here now or you're watching it later, welcome. This is part of the Blount Women Behaving Badly series for Blount County for Women's History Month, and we're going to have more activities on Wednesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock as well that will be live streamed too. Please come back to learn more. So, I am talking about one of the most well-known figures in literary history. Obviously, I know that this is why everybody tuned in to hear about Roswitha of Gandersheim. It just trips off the tongue, right? Who could forget Roswitha of Gandersheim? And just to make it more complicated, that's not the only thing that she's known by. We have Roswitha, all of the V's, all of the W's. I brought two separate books today that have completely different spellings of this. So go with whatever makes you happy. I think she would be pleased just to be known. So as you see, there are a lot of variations. We don't have accounts of her from the time period where she left or where she lived. And in fact, the only time we have her writing down her own name is in Latin in her book. So that's why you get the top line of Roswitha of Gandersheim. So we don't know what her Saxon name would have been, which is why we have so much division on that. So, why should you care about Roswitha of Gandersheim? Okay, if you didn't get it earlier, no, nobody knows who this is. But I argue that you should, because she is amazing. So, some of the things that she is the first for. She is the first female writer, and since she's the first writer, she's also the first poet from what is now Germany, so the Saxon area. She is also the first female historian in the West. There are several female historians in the East that were there a long time before her, but she's the first one whose writings we have now in the West. She is also the first one since the fall of the Roman Empire to be writing in Latin, writing plays in Latin. And I wasn't able to find this out for sure, but I would also venture that there's a good chance that she was the first Christian playwright as well. I want to do more research on that. And it is interesting to see what this Christian playwright writes about. She is also the first Northern European to write about Islam and the Islamic Empire, which is, she learns a lot about secondhand because she has contact with several people from the Byzantine Empire who are bringing this in. So, what do we know about this woman? Well, we don't even know her name. We do know that she is associated with Gandersheim, which we'll talk about more. She is a historian. We have 8 legends that she wrote about historical people. She is a poet. She wrote 2 epic poems that we have, a short poem, and all of her drama is in poetic form as well. She wrote 6 plays that we have. And we know she's born before 940. They referred to her being older than the abbess there, who was born in 940. And we know she lived at least until 973. And if you Google her name, pretty much people say, oh, she died that year. I have seen no evidence for that claim at all, other than she really liked to write. So if we don't have any more writing, she must be dead, obviously. But I want to know more. So she did write in Latin, even her own name, and she is a secular canoness. So obviously everybody knows what a secular canoness is, right? I mean, obviously. Okay. Oh, and I forgot to mention this Albrecht Dürer wood carving of her presenting her works to the emperor, and we'll talk more about him in a little while, Otto II, Holy Roman Emperor. Evidently, we're having a Holy Roman Empire Day. So she is memorialized here. I love that she, as in the other pictures you're going to see, is dressed as a nun. Because, well, when I learned a bit more about what a secular canoness was, I found this great definition from Margaret C. Schaus from Women and Gender in Medieval Europe, an encyclopedia. A canoness is generally recognized as a woman who had adopted the religious life and who lived in community, but yet differed from nuns in several important respects. They made no permanent vows. They could leave the community whenever they wished. They did not relinquish private property upon entering the community, and even maintained separate residences and servants. They wore secular clothing rather than the black habit of Benedictine nuns, and they performed various public duties, largely freeing them from the requirement of claustration. So you don't have to stay there. You don't have to give up your stuff. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right? So it is interesting then to see all of these images in the presentation where she is definitely nun-like. But I will say, for all of my joking, Roswitha is definitely a dedicated Christian who was giving her life for that. That comes through in all of her work. However, she is a bit more complicated than only that. She goes beyond what I expected from that. So, first of all, we have Gandersheim Abbey. This is still there today, and I put a map on here. The closest modern city is, and I can't see on there, I think it's Hanover. And so this is in the middle of nowhere. It was in the middle of nowhere then, too. But this comes in handy. So first of all, there are only daughters of aristocrats who are accepted here. So we know her family must have been aristocratic, presumably rich. And this had been founded in 852. So approximately 100 years before she joins. So this had already become an important abbey at that time. So it is a center of learning for women in the region. And when she is there, I mentioned one of her friends who was born in 940, Gerberga II is the abbess there. And as you see, she's pretty well placed. Her uncle is Otto II, the Holy Roman Emperor, and her grandfather was Otto I. So she's set up pretty well, but she chooses this cloistered life, and by all accounts, she does an excellent job. She is extremely learned. We know she even spoke Greek, and so she actually teaches Roswitha a number of new things. So in 947, slightly before Roswitha would be there, the abbey actually was granted independence by Otto. And what is fascinating about this is it means they had their own court of law. But not only that, they could raise their own army, and they could print their own money. I mean, they can do everything. And they had a seat on the imperial council. So this is a serious place of power for women, which is probably not usual for medieval Europe. But this is the environment that Roswitha is coming from. So it is important to know that context. So she actually calls herself the clamorous voice, the loud, ringing voice of Gandersheim. I love that she is happy to give herself this title, and she lives up to it. She really does. So one of the interesting things about her work is she manages to mix in comedy and tragedy. Usually before this, it would be pretty much one or the other, and most of her plays are about tragic things, lives of saints, where you have people dying for their beliefs, and then there's some comedy thrown in. I mean, serious slapstick. We're going to look at an example in a minute. The key to so many of these stories is female integrity, that they are not going to be broken down by anything. They're not going to give in. They're not going to give up their beliefs. They're going to stay even when it does kill them. Again, she's writing about martyrs. So here is a picture from a woodcut of the 1501 text that we have, and we'll talk more about that particular text later. But this is from one of her, probably the most famous play, Dulcidius, and we have 3 women being martyred in a fire for this. So what else is interesting about this picture? The longer you look at it, the odder it gets, is the men behaving badly. So if you hadn't noticed, this man who is threatening them with a sword has some interesting placement of the sword. So it is not just coming from the person who is creating this woodcut. It is also very much in line with the characters of these stories. They are very worldly. You would think, okay, she's a canoness. She is too pure for the world. She would not know anything about all of that. Oh no, she does. And some people think because of this worldliness, she may have lived in the court of Otto before she went to the abbey. They don't know, but that is certainly a possibility. And she might have gone after she joined the abbey. That was certainly allowed for a canoness. So, Dulcidius, and by the way, if anybody says Latin and wants to correct me, let me know. There are lots of pronunciations out there for this, but Dulcidius seems to be the most common one. So this has, as I said before, a serious mix of comedy and tragedy. And this is the biggest one. It goes all in, because he is talking about these 3 Christian virgins who will not submit to his will in any way, shape, or form. And yes, he talks about most different ways, shapes, and forms. So we have the 3 women talking amongst themselves because they have been imprisoned in a room next to the kitchen so that he can visit them freely. And they're narrating what is going on. Look, the fool, the madman base, he thinks he is enjoying our embrace. What is he doing? Into his lap, he pulls the utensils, he embraces the pots and pans, giving them tender kisses. So we have a setup for slapstick here, and even the women saying, it's ridiculous. His face, his hands, his clothes are so soiled, so filthy, that with all the soot that clings to him, he looks like an Ethiopian. It is only right that he should appear in body the way he is in his mind, possessed by the devil. So a little medieval casual racism. Not good, but also, doesn't this sound like a slapstick plot from like a movie in the 30s, or maybe even like an episode of The Honeymooners or I Love Lucy in the 50s? This is something that reads a lot more modern. This is not what we expect. And this is the person in power who is being mocked. This is Dulcidius. This actually happens toward the beginning of the play, and afterwards we get to see the aftermath of his embarrassment. And his wife actually is frustrated with him. The Christians have made a laughing stock out of you. Dulcidius, now I know at last. I owe this mockery to their witchcraft. I command that those insolent girls be led forth, and that they shall be publicly stripped of all their clothes. Yes, that is immediately where it goes. But immediately after that, we get the soldiers saying, we labor in vain, we sweat without gain. Behold, their garments stick to their virginal bodies like skin. So we have lots of very sexualized punishments in these plays. And that is notable. Again, you don't really expect Rosvitha to be the person who's pointing all of this out. But it's also interesting because we can't tell from the manuscript that we have and what's come down to us about stage directions. Do we see any of this? Is this read aloud? Is this acted out? We have no evidence that these plays were actually performed. You're going to see a picture a little bit later on of someone dressed as a nun, not a canoness, reading aloud to other women in a room. And so it is interesting to see because it is a very different tone if you hear this read out loud than to see it happening. So it makes me wonder what the intention was, if the intention was always to read it or if it was to act it out. And at this point, we don't know. There's a good chance that we never will know. But hey, in the 20th century, they found some more fragments of her work, so you never know. So I have mentioned the title a couple of times, Dulcidius. I also want to mention the fact that she did not give the play this name. So this is the name given to it by the man in the late 15th century who found her, who rescued her, and titled it Dulcidius based on the man who is in the first two scenes. And so people reading this in the 16th and 17th century were like, but this is all wrong. Dulcidius is the title, and then he disappears. Not realizing that that wasn't her title ever. Her title was The Passion of the Holy Virgins Agape, Chionia, and Irena. So it is, who do continue to appear, well, until they get picked off one by one and become martyrs. But I do love this particular image where at the end of the story, they're chasing, or they've led one soldier who has been in charge running around a mountain. Again, I would love to see how that might be staged. Just have a little picture of a mountain and you run around it, being completely lost as he is trying to take her to a brothel and kill her. So, and or kill her, it may be after the brothel threat. There are a lot of those, sadly. So it is interesting to see the different focus, whether it is on Dulcidius or on the martyrs themselves. So another play that is worth mentioning, and again, feel free to correct my Latin, Sapientia. This is about a woman whose daughters are all martyred. And it's all because she has challenged the Roman Empire. She's speaking to the Emperor Hadrian, and what has really made them mad is the fact that she is encouraging women not to sleep with their husbands. I mean, they can deal with a lot of things, but that is crossing a line. If you're familiar with the older play Lysistrata, this is not an original idea, but still, no, she must be stopped. And you get this scene of a little girl speaking to the Roman emperor. So, Fides, look with respect upon the venerable image of great Diana. Bring offerings to the holy goddess, like the old gods, so that you may possess her favor. Fides, oh, what a foolish imperial command, worthy of nothing but contempt. Again, this is kind of shocking. She's going up against the emperor. What are you mumbling in derision? Whom are you mocking with your wry expression? It is your foolishness I deride, and I mock your stupidity. My stupidity, yes. The emperor's, yes, his. For what is more foolish, what can seem more stupid than your command to show contempt for the creator of all and venerable base metal instead? I've called him a fool, I now call him a fool, and I shall call him a fool as long as I live. So, a woman writing this, a woman who knows the Holy Roman Emperor, writing this about a little girl talking back to the emperor. Of course, you know what happens next in the play, right? That as long as I live doesn't last very long and she becomes a martyr. But it is fascinating to see over and over and over again these female characters talking back to power. They feel that they're in the right with their Christian beliefs, and so they speak out. Again, it's not exactly what I expected to see. So a few more common themes, as I said before, a picture of one woman reading this out, obviously created much later. So speaking truth to power. Intelligent women. In that last play, there's also a scene where the mother character schools the emperor on a math lesson. He asks how old her daughters are, and she gives him kind of a riddle, and then she explains the work. She offers the proof and everything, all of the steps. And literally a whole page in the book is the math lesson. So these are smart, witty women next to bumbling men. There are a few exceptions of good Christian men, but they are the exception. And all of the truly, truly evil characters, with one exception that I will mention in a minute, are men. And they are threatening the women. So, of course, if we have women martyred, they are beautiful virgins. And their beauty is definitely emphasized. Punishment that is very sexualized, whether they're told, take them to become bawds, to be raped. And there's also one that just I can't quite deal with, where her punishment is just chop off her nipples. And the miracle that happens is that milk pours forth instead of blood. But some of these connections are in her sources, many are not. She is adding to this. There's even necrophilia in one of the plays, and interestingly enough, the man who was threatening the necrophilia ends up being saved. He has changed. He literally dies, and he is risen, and he becomes good. But yeah, he can't get the woman. In fact, she says, I would rather die than be with you. And God allows her to drop dead. And then he was like, well, maybe I could have her body. And then, yeah, he becomes saved. So even the worst people can become saved in this, though many choose not to. So with this, she is also clear about giving people second chances. She has several characters who are acknowledged to be whores, who sometimes are absolutely saved, who find Christ, who atone for their sins. It's not just, oh, she's fallen, we're going to leave her there. There is a second chance for everybody. Whether or not they do anything with it is up to them. So, speaking of a very good man in her writing, and the one wicked woman that I can think of in this, I want to mention the legend of Gongolf. You may actually see him as Gongolphus, as the saint, but in her version it is Gongolf. And with this, just know, he's a really good guy. His wife gets very, very bored, cheats on him with the chaplain of their place, and then later on has the chaplain murder him. And afterwards, miracles start happening. She says, oh, those are not miracles, they're not related to him. And we have what a difference a translation can make. This is one interesting translation. Why do you waste your breath zealously pretending that such miracles are performed through Gongolf's merits? These so-called wonders are nothing but lies, and if he can pour forth miracles from his tomb, then I can work great wonders with my ass. Yeah, again, not what I was expecting from Roswitha. So, with this, as people may be familiar with Chaucer might guess, this is talking about, shall we say, passing wind. And so what happens because of this is she is now cursed. Another miracle. And when she speaks, Every time she says something, lo, a marvelous happening followed her words, according with the taunt she had uttered. This is from a different translation, by the way. For from her came forth sounds so disgusting that our tongue abhors to mention them. Again, fart sounds. And with this, to be clear, in her source material, this happens to the wife, but only on Fridays. I don't know what's going on with Fridays, but only on Fridays. She winds this to any time, all the time. So yeah, again, not what you expect from Roswitha of Gandersheim, right? So that isn't enough. I also want to mention that her lover, the cleric from their land, he's punished too. And, well, I have a third translation on my phone. Let me read this. By heaven's decree, he suddenly poured out his bowels and heart, so lately puffed up with pride and sin, and thus was laid low. That is this particular translation. One of my favorite academic finds was taking it back to the Latin, where it was something about the organ that had previously been his tumid delight. And thus what seems to explode in her version and not her sources' versions? The exploding penis. Again, not what I expected from a 10th century canoness. So I like Roswitha. So with this, she evidently is letting the punishment fit the crime. Don't know. So after her death, long after her death, she is rediscovered. And one thing that I've just recently found out, I really want to do more research on this, but Conrad Celtes really makes a name off of her. He was known as one of the biggest humanists in the region, but he evidently stole the manuscript, the handwritten manuscript from Gandersheim, the only copy anybody had, and printed it and raked in profits, and actually received one of the earliest copyright permissions for it after stealing a copy. So I definitely want to learn more about this, but that sort of goes along with everything else where, you have men not necessarily doing right by the women. But I love, on the right is the picture from his edition in 1501 of Roswitha presenting her works to Emperor Otto II. So he is presenting his work to his emperor in the same way, his edition of her work. And actually, he does a great job in publicizing her, making people interested, and then it gets translated into a number of languages, including English, in the 16th and 17th centuries. Then kind of goes missing for a while, and then the 20th century, people are like, oh yeah, remember her? And so she becomes more widespread, starting maybe in the 1990s. So now you often get mentions of her with writing of the time period, but of course, I would argue not enough. So I'm ready for people to be able to hear the name Roswitha of Gandersheim or any other variation thereunto, and automatically choose, yes, I want to go to that. Just so you know, many of these plays are available in productions on YouTube. You can seek them out. If you want to learn more about the legend of Gongolf, definitely Google, though again, be careful about what you choose to click on. Thank you guys very much for coming. Remember, we have more Blunt Women Behaving Badly on Wednesday with music, and on Thursday with a lecture about romance novelists, which should be wonderful. So thank you guys so much for coming.